Welcome to our fifth week of digging deeper into the highest calling of those who choose to follow Jesus. Sort of the foundation of our faith, um, forgiveness. We've been introduced to the word utumbu, the understanding that human beings are connected to each other. For you see, what's really at stake when we talk about forgiveness is relationships and human relationships. Um, we've explored how forgiveness composed the two bookends of Jesus' life and ministry, and we've explored how Bishop Tutu led the South African leadership to see that without forgiveness there was no future of the South African life to be different than it had been under apartheid. But this week we're exploring that we're starting a 5-week journey as we deal with forgiveness, of exploring forgiveness as the heart of the gospel. We're going to summarize we're going to look at 5 components of discipleship: justice, healing, freedom, grace, and peace. Now, there could be more components of discipleship, but I've just uh, picked those 5 as sort of primary components of our life of discipleship. And we're going to look each week at one of those to see how the experience of forgiveness enables each of those to function in the life of discipleship following Jesus. And we call it the heart of the gospel. Forgiveness is the heart of the gospel. Because just as organs of our physical bodies are enabled to function because of the heart pumping lifeblood into all of our bodies and every organ of the body, so does forgiveness pump agape love into these different components of discipleship. So that's the concept we're working with, is forgiveness is the heart of the gospel, relating to discipleship as our physical hearts um, uh, supply lifeblood to the different organs that compose our anatomy. And this week, we begin with the experience, the component of discipleship that we call justice. Now, um, that's really important because as we talk about justice in relationship to forgiveness, we confront a primary objection to the understanding that forgiveness is the heart of the gospel. This objection is made by persons who claim to follow Jesus. And the objection is that forgiveness is a contradiction to justice, for it lets the wrongdoer off the hook of responsibility for wrongdoing. Again, the objection to forgiveness is that forgiveness gets the wrongdoer off the hook of responsibility for wrongdoing. And this position is common, well known. It exists in our conversation that we've had in our church school classes for the last 4 weeks. But I think we just have to confront this head on. Now, I'm just going to represent how this dialogue has taken place in the last 4 weeks and in the last 2,000 years in the Christian community. Now, some of these persons who object openly choose to preach and teach primarily from portions of the Hebrew Bible, which are based on the first understanding of the law, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, Jesus' life and teachings was over against this first law. And he said, rather than an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, we live in relationship with others, with grace rather than law. We also remember what Gandhi, who was not a Christian by his own profession, reminding us that the consequence of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is that everyone will become blind. Now, some of these persons also claim that justice and responsibility for wrongdoing is obliterated when we offer forgiveness to the wrongdoer. We must be clear. To forgive does not remove the role of society to execute consequences for wrongdoing. I was confronted with this truth at the beginning of my ministry when I personally invited Chaplain Post in the 1960s, the chaplain who served in the prison which held two persons who murdered in cold blood the Western Kansas Clutter family. Chaplain Post came out to Oakley, spoke to 700 youth from Methodist churches in Western Kansas. And he shared that he offered forgiveness to these murderers. He shared this with those 700 youth. Karen and I accompanied Chaplain Post and an imprisoned prisoner that was given release to accompany Chaplain Post to Oakley. We drove them back to Lansing on an overnight drive. He had to be back at work on Monday morning. Karen and I discovered that night a saint, Chaplain Post, who was committed to the spiritual welfare of two murderers. Through the gift of forgiveness, while at the same time believing that the murderers had to face the consequences of their behavior. Now, others of the persons who object to the ethic of forgiveness, they claim that this forgiveness gives permission for the wrongdoer to continue to the same kind of behavior over and over again. And this allows us to give up on a person, the same person whom God never gives up on. Remember the parable of the lost sheep? 99 were safe in the fold, but what did the shepherd do? He was concerned about the one that was lost. And supporting and being an enabler of forgiveness as one who receives forgiveness from God and strives to be forgiving towards others. We don't give up on people. You see, it's the miracle of forgiveness that a person changes as a consequence of being forgiven. And so to say that a person who's forgiven is just going to do the same thing over and over again is not the case, because people do change if they are truly accept the gift of forgiveness. Now, you see, often the objection to answering the high calling to a life of being forgiven and forgiving is an understanding of justice as retribution justice, which has as its only goal punishment. But you see, there's the understanding of justice that is restorative justice, that restores broken relationships and has as its primary goal ruptured relationships that are broken can be healed. It does not rule out accountability, but has a higher goal that is for the benefit of the human race. Remember, you tumble. We are a bundle, and everything that happens to anybody happens to us. For in the restoration of relationships and restorative justice, that is above, but includes justice, suffering the consequences of one's behavior. See, being forgiven and forgiving is the faith journey, the foundation of the belief that there are new beginnings in life, different than what one has done in the past. As you see, restorative justice, which includes dealing with the consequences of behavior, is amazing grace that saved one like me. We sing the hymn about new beginnings, and we're called to live the life of one who has been forgiven and indeed strives to be forgiving. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved one like me. So that's how the miracle of forgiveness, Utambu, gives life to a new understanding of justice as a vital component of discipleship. There's so much there, but for your thinking and conversation, I've got a couple of questions. First, what's your response to the position that there's a growing distinction between Christians who object to the centrality of forgiveness in the gospel and followers of Jesus who hear and strive to respond to be forgiven and forgiving? Secondly, what's your response to the understanding of restorative justice, which includes accountability within the higher goal of restoring individual relationships and the human community? Thank you for being a part of exploring how forgiveness is the heart of the gospel and enables a new understanding of justice to prevail.